Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to celebrate the publication of the second edition of Island, and thank you for being so patient while we fix the technical problems that always happens whenever we try to do a high-tech presentation. It seems so long ago, actually 42 years ago, when him, Mark Lai, and Jenny Lim and I began working on the first edition of Island. It was right after the park ranger Alexander Weiss had discovered the poetry, the Chinese poems that were carved on the immigration walls at Angel Island. Soon after, we found out about the poetry and we became aware of this history. And by the way, Alexander Weiss just passed away in October last month. But in any case, it's because of him and his consciousness about the importance of these poems that we began to learn about Angel Island and its connection to our history as Chinese Americans. And we joined other community activists and descendants of Angel Island detainees to begin researching and preserving and saving the poems and the immigration site. And him, Mark, Jenny, and I teamed up and decided that our contribution to this effort would be to collect and translate as many Chinese poems as we can, conduct oral histories with former detainees, and write and publish a book about this dark chapter of Chinese American history.
麥禮謙、林小琴同埋本人着手開始艾倫詩集第一版嘅時候，剛好係42年前。呢個係因為聽到園林守衛員 Alexander Weiss 先生發現有人喺天使島移民站牆壁上面題詩。好快，我哋同幾位美國亞裔團體裏邊嘅活動分子攜手合作，努力拯救呢啲詩歌同埋移民站。我哋嘅目的係保留同埋翻譯詩歌，進行收集口述歷史，同埋撰寫一本書嚟記錄美國華人歷史上黑暗嘅一頁。
It was in the process of doing the research and the oral histories for the book that we came across Ted Yee and Smiley Jan. They were both had been detained at Angel Island in the 1930s. And they had taken the trouble to copy down every Chinese poem they could see on the walls into their notebooks. And when we met up with them and were interviewing them, they turned up their collection and gave us the notebooks to use for our book. And so these poems, over 100 of them that we could use from their notebooks, combined with the oral histories that we did with other detainees, formed the primary sources for the first edition of Island.
為呢一本書做研究嘅過程中，我哋遇上咗兩位曾經被拘留嘅人士，鄭文晃同埋余達明。原來佢哋老早喺天使島拘留期間已經不厭其煩，抄低咗近100首詩喺佢哋嘅筆記簿裏面。佢哋嘅記錄同埋我哋後來訪問39個拘留者嘅口述故事。就組成咗艾倫詩集嘅第一版嘅第一手資料。
So we actually finished this book in 3 years, and then we couldn't find a publisher because all the publishers we approached did not think there was a market for this book. Now, this is in 1980. So with the support of the Chinese Culture Center and the San Francisco Study Center, and with kind of grants from the Zellerbach Family Fund and the Wallace Gorbodi Foundation, we were able to self-publish the book in 1980.
我哋花咗3年嘅時間完成咗艾倫詩集，但係揾唔到出版商。最後通過咗舊金山研究中心同埋中華文化中心嘅協助，終於喺1980年自己出版。
Then the University of Washington Press became our publisher in 1991, and they have kept this book in print since. And I think it's mainly due to the fact that this has become a literary staple in Asian American studies and American literature classes throughout the country.
1991年至到今日，華盛頓大學出版社接手做我哋嘅出版商，主要係因為呢本書已經成為咗喺美國學府中研究美國亞裔同埋美國文學嘅經典教材。
So with all the new research that have been done about Angel Island since the publication of our book, we decided that we should update, expand, and write a new edition of Island. Unfortunately, Himmark Lai did not live long enough to help us complete the second edition. Left without his Chinese language skills, because Jenny and my Chinese are pretty bad, but he was the one that had the language and the historical knowledge. But without him, we had to turn to Marlon Ham and Charles Egan, and also Ellen, to help us translate the new poems that had been found at the immigration stations at Ellis Island and at Victoria, BC, as well as was published in Sunning Jati. And it's with their help that we were able then to finish the second edition.
從第一版推出後到現在，已經陸續出現咗新嘅天使島研究資料，所以係合時候需要更新同埋修訂呢本書啦。唔好彩嘅係麥禮謙先生早逝，並冇參與完成第二版。我哋痛失英才，但係好彩有 Charles Egan 同埋譚雅倫教授仗義幫忙。翻譯出現加拿大維多利亞愛麗絲島上面曾經刊載《新靈》雜誌嘅新詩歌。
So what is new about the second edition? We have expanded the historical introduction, and we have replaced the excerpts of oral histories in the first edition with 20 full profiles of Chinese that we had interviewed previously. And we have also included over 100 photographs in this book. The previous edition had only 22 photographs. So I think when you compare the size, the scope, and the contents of the second edition to the first, you will want to invest in the second edition.
第二版究竟有咩新嘅地方呢？我哋加長咗歷史介紹部分，用20個拘留者嘅故事。附有真實名字同埋照片，取代咗第一版用嘅口述歷史片段。第一版只有22幅照片，第二版則有超過100幅。你哋只需要比較一下兩本書嘅大小、範圍同埋內容，相信你哋會覺得第二版係好值得你哋投資㗎。
So finally, I want to take this opportunity to publicly thank a number of people who helped us with this book and to make its publication possible. And I would like to ask that they stand and be recognized when I call their name, and that you all hold your applause until I get through the whole list of people, and we'll applaud them at the end.
最後 ，Judy 想借呢個機會感謝下列在座人士嘅支持同埋幫助。請呢啲人士企起身跟大家見面。各位來賓，請你哋等介紹結束晒啦先至鼓掌。
So beginning with Marjorie Beggs, she's with the San Francisco Study Center. Is she here? I was going to thank her for believing in our work before any other publishers did. And it was the San Francisco Study Center who helped us publish the first edition of Island. I'd like to also thank two photographers, Leland Wong and Chris Huey. They were the first to take pictures of the poems and of the immigration station in the 1970s, and to put together an exhibit, a pictorial exhibit at the Jackson Street Gallery. Leland and Chris, are you here? Could you stand up? Chris is in the back, I think. There he is. Hold your applause. I just want to make sure that they... Okay. Dan Kwan, I know he's here. I think of him as being Mr. Angel Island, because he always provides us with photos, graphics, information, details, whenever we need it, whenever asked. Dan Kwan. And Felicia Lowe, she made a film called Carved in Silence, which I think all of you are familiar with. We have copies of it on sale in the back, if you don't have a copy or have not seen it. And she was generous enough to allow us to use the oral histories that she had for that film. Jan Ye He, she's a librarian from the East Asiatic Library. Is she here? Could you stand up, Jan? Okay, she was the one that helped us put together the Chinese bibliography of Angel Island sources in the back of the book. Thank you, Jan. And Ellen, I just want to publicly acknowledge that she did meticulous work helping us to copy edit all of the Chinese text plus the footnotes. And she's always on call to help with translation. We couldn't have done it without her. Eddie Feng, stand up Eddie, and Vincent Chin, and Kathy Ong. All three of them laboriously helped me put together statistical tables, reading microfilm data from Ancestry.com, and the tables tell us exactly how many Chinese came through Angel Island, how long did they stay at Angel Island, how many of them were excluded, how many appealed the decision, and how many succeeded or deported at the end. So now we have definitive statistics thanks to their work. Erica Lee, my co-author on my first book, Angel Island Immigrant Gateway to America. I want to thank her for her significant contributions to Asian American history scholarship and for her collegial support through this project. And Erica has a book coming out next year, the definitive book called The Making of Asian America, A History. And Ruthann Lum McCunn, Roxy. Every book I do, she helps me with. And so I want to thank her for her sound editorial advice throughout this book project. And she has a new book that's just out called Chinese Yankee, A True Story from the Civil War. And she's having a book launch at the San Francisco Public Library, the main library, next Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. So please, join her for her book launch and buy a copy of her book. And finally, Laura Lai. Oops, she's not here. Oh, yes, she is. Laura's in the front here. And I would like to thank you, Laura, for all of your editorial support in the absence of Himmark Live. And it is to Himmark that we are dedicating the second edition of Island. Now we can join me for applause for all the people that have this